This is Lauren Steiner with The Robust Opposition. This is the first show of 2019, and I'm interviewing Branko Marcetic, who is a staff writer with Jacobin magazine, and he wrote an excellent article on Kamala Harris, who I call Counterfeit Kamala, and even though she hasn't declared that she's running for president, I figured it was a good time to discuss this article. And also, we just talked about his article on Beto O'Rourke and a couple of his colleagues' articles on Beto O'Rourke, and how he is really not a progressive at all, despite the fact that people want to make him look like a progressive. And now we're going to talk about the actual progressive, so far the only person who has declared for president. That's not exactly true because Jay Inslee just declared, and he is the governor of Washington, the Democratic governor of Washington, running entirely on a platform of addressing climate change. And I'm really going to try to get him on my show because he's done some wonderful things in that state. But Elizabeth Warren basically announced the other day that she has started an exploratory committee to run for president, which is the same thing as announcing that you're running for president, by the way. And she put out an excellent video which highlighted her life's work, which is exposing what's been happening to the middle class over the last decades, the 40 decades of neoliberalism, pretty much. She's exposed them as an author and as a professor and as a congressperson. And she's also made a career of fighting Wall Street and starting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we're going to talk about, with Branko, although he did not necessarily write an article on Elizabeth Warren, he's been doing some research, as have I, into her background to find out how progressive she is. Now, I will just to say for full transparency that I was part of the Draft Warren for Senate campaign in 2012 because I was part of the Occupy movement, and I was very aware of how she was taking on Wall Street, and I thought she was fantastic. So I did offer, but ultimately did not end up hosting a fundraiser for her here in California. She went to a rich person's house, and I went to the fundraiser and I met Elizabeth and I had a picture taken with her and I was thrilled as punch. I really admire her quite a lot for what she's accomplished. And then in 2014, I did a Not Ready for Hillary protest before Bernie announced, and I was holding up signs saying Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders should run for president.
Hey, Mr. 1% studio executive getting out of your car. You should be supporting Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Those are the two progressives in the Democratic Party, not a neoliberal like Hillary Clinton. She hasn't met a free trade agreement that she doesn't like. She hasn't met a fossil fuel that she doesn't like. And that's who we should be supporting, a real Democrat, not a corporate Democrat.
And so I fully think that Elizabeth Warren is progressive. And if Bernie doesn't run, I will be supporting her. But I'm just curious as to what your impressions of Elizabeth Warren are before we delve into her actual record.
Yeah, I mean, Warren is definitely progressive, and she's far better than most every other candidate that's sort of been floated so far that's had their name kind of out there. I think one thing to keep in mind before we kind of go into a record is, I mean, people have sort of said that, you know, ultimately Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren both have the same exact record, and that's partly true. I think, you know, they have tended to kind of highlight specific issues, often the sort of the corporate greed and the kind of the way that the middle class has been left behind, the way that ordinary Americans have been left behind, and the way that the rules of the game are rigged. But I think the main thing with Warren that we're going to see as we, I guess, talk a little bit more about it is that although she would be a fine choice in any other year, the fact is I think she's a politician who is far too cautious and, to be honest, moderate for this particular time, this particular moment that we're living in. We can talk about that a little later in more depth. But, you know, one example I would give of this is that, in fact, you know, it's sort of the thing that actually led to Sanders' rise in the first place. The reason that Sanders ran, according to the book about the Hillary Clinton campaign, which escapes me now, but you know, according to that book, the reason that Bernie ran was because Warren told him that she wasn't going to mount a challenge to Hillary Clinton. And, you know, basically since having been elected to Congress, she was once very critical of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton herself. And once she was elected, you know, she was someone who wanted to play the game. She when she released a book in 2015, she actually left out her criticisms of Hillary Clinton that got so much attention out of the book, presumably not to sort of offend her and to kind of play ball. Whereas and I think we've seen that in other ways. Warren has been less willing to, I think, push the Democratic Party. Not to say she hasn't. She obviously has in some issues. But I think she's someone who also is hesitant to really take on the Democratic Party and make them move further left in certain issues, which they need to do desperately, not just for the sake of, you know, ordinary American families, although that is obviously a big thing, but also for the future of the world that we're living in.
Dave Diane wrote an article, which I think I shared with you, in which he tries to make the distinction that Bernie is just more socialist than she is, that she defends capitalism. She says she's a proud capitalist. She has a capitalist reform bill, one of the bills that we'll talk about. Accountable Capitalism Act is what it's called. In that article, he talked about Bernie wanting to nationalize healthcare, which is not exactly true. What Bernie wants to have is a single payer. So he doesn't want to have a national healthcare system in the sense that England has it, where the doctors and the hospitals are owned by the government, right? The doctors and the hospitals under single payer would still be private. We would just cut out the insurance companies, the private insurance companies, as the payer to make it more efficient. So Dave was trying to create a dichotomy that I don't think is as neat as he wants it to be. Plus Bernie, you know, and Kyle Kulinski did a great video about this, whether Bernie is a democratic socialist like he says, or whether in fact he's really a social democrat like they are in Europe. Because a democratic socialist is much more of a socialist. You have essential services being provided by the government and only the government. And I don't think Bernie wants to do that. He doesn't want to nationalize the banks. He doesn't want to nationalize transportation. He doesn't want to nationalize, you know, real estate, make all housing public housing. I think he is a little bit closer to Elizabeth Warren. But like you said, I think he's a lot less cautious. I want to add something to what you said about Hillary. Now, there are people all over social media that say they will never support Elizabeth Warren because she did not endorse Bernie Sanders when it counted, you know, which was before the Massachusetts primary. And I agree. I wanted her to endorse Bernie. I wanted her to be courageous. But what a lot of people don't know, and remember, at this point, everybody thought that Hillary was going to win. We know that Hillary is very vindictive. We know that Bill is very vindictive. He had an actual enemies list. And Elise Hogue got on Bill Clinton's enemies list when she supported Obama in 2008 when she was with Move On. So in 2012, she wasn't going to make that mistake again. And she was an early supporter of Hillary Clinton. So it really takes a lot to cross the Clintons. And what Elizabeth Warren did was Barbara Boxer circulated a secret letter in 2009, I think it was. Basically, she got every woman senator at the time to sign on to this letter saying that they would support Hillary Clinton when she ran in 2016. And Elizabeth Warren signed that letter. And when Barbara Boxer had her breakfast for Hillary Clinton, when she announced, Elizabeth Warren was the only woman senator not to attend. And that was a very big statement. That was a very public statement for those who knew about this breakfast. And she also did not endorse Hillary until after she had enough delegates. Of course, that included the superdelegates, which we oppose, but until she had enough delegates. So she did try to make a little protest in her kind of Elizabeth Warren-y sort of way. Right. You know, she went as far as she could with that. But I think the other thing that a lot of progressives won't forgive her for is not coming out against Standing Rock, you know, coming out against the Dakota Access Pipeline and going to Standing Rock or making a statement about Standing Rock until December of that year after it was already pretty much over, you know.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up the Standing Rock thing because that, I think, you know, people have this thing to say about Bernie Sanders, which is that they say that he, you know, he's a one-issue candidate. Well, okay. I mean, I don't think that's true, but one case where we can really see that is that Sanders has actually had one of the best environmental records among Democrats. Well, really among all congressmen in the U.S. You know, for example, there's an organization called the Climate Hawks Vote PAC that did a ranking, and they ranked him something like third or fourth. I think he actually jumped up a place the next year. That was in 2015. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, was voted in that in that scorecard somewhere around the middle. She wasn't the worst, but she wasn't particularly distinguished. And you see now as the presidential race is ramping up and people are putting their names in the ring and everything, a lot of environmental outlets have written about Warren's record, and it remains largely undistinguished on the environment. Now, of course, Warren has come out.
She actually, if you look at some of her statements, you can find this on YouTube. She's come out very, very strong and very early against the Keystone Pipeline. So she didn't do that. She may not have come out against the Dakota Access Pipeline, but she certainly has come out against Keystone. And I don't think she's made any bad votes on the environment.
No. Her vote, well, this is the thing. It's not that she's done anything bad. It's when you look at it. I mean, the environmental issue, climate change, is the defining issue of our time. We literally have a ticking clock right now. You know, that basically gives us 10 years to try and overhaul the entire way that our economies are structured before there's irreversible and catastrophic results. I mean, it's scary stuff, and I don't think people take it seriously enough. Warren is, not to say she can't get better, but Warren is someone who environmental issues have really taken a back seat. She's always voted well, but you look at what environmental activists have said. They all say that, you know, that she hasn't really distinguished herself in the issue. There's no major piece of legislation that she's introduced. There is one recently where she introduced a bill that was her big climate bill, and what it was that it would force companies to disclose kind of what the climate impacts of their businesses was. Now, of course, that's not bad, but that is, in the face of what we are facing, that bill is, you know, it's really meaningless. It doesn't, you know, a politician, the next presidential candidate for Democrats is really going to be someone who really takes on a lot of entrenched interests, not just the fossil fuel industry, but a lot of other entrenched interests that are fueling the continuing ongoing climate catastrophe that we're on the road to. You know, Warren, you know, it's sort of, Sanders has talked about climate change as an existential threat. It's the greatest threat facing civilization. You know, I think Warren, in her statement for that bill that she put out, talked about how, you know, it's important that shareholders know why, you know, how climate effects of the companies.
Yeah.
Climate Risk Disclosure Act. I'm sorry. So I mean, I think this bill is sort of instructive. I mean, Sanders, and I mean, I can't go into too much detail, but Sanders has a long, if you just Google Sanders environmental record, has a long list of, for years he's been championing environmental issues and written bills. He actually wrote a bill with Hillary Clinton, like a green jobs bill back in, I think 2007, 2008. So he has a long history of doing this stuff. Warren, this is the first bill she's authored on the environment, and what it's about disclosing, companies disclose, which disclosure is good, of course, but that's not nearly enough. Not to say that if she was nominated, she couldn't be pushed to take further radical action, but I think that is a very clear contrast in policy. Sanders has taken the environment and climate change seriously for a long time.
Yeah.
Warren is only now getting to it, and people don't really know, you know, what, you know, I think she endorsed the Green New Deal idea, but it's a very easy thing to endorse that. No one really knows quite what that's going to mean. I mean, the Green New Deal it should be an incredibly radical piece of legislation that you know, if anything, sort of takes us to a kind of almost wartime government role in terms of overhauling infrastructure and putting up the necessary defenses for climate change and doing so much more. It could also be a bill that basically just privatizes, sort of a Trump's.
I mean, I'm going to be doing on the Green New Deal. I'm going to be having Jill Stein actually come on a week from Sunday, and she popularized the term in her 2012 campaign, the Green New Deal. Although Tom Friedman, believe it or not, that sort of neoliberal columnist, came up with it, I believe, in 2009. I did a little Wikipedia search on the Green New Deal. And then Varshini Prakash from the Sunrise Movement is going to be on my show on the 16th. So I'm going to be asking all those questions about the Green New Deal. I mean, one distinction I think Jill Stein has from the Sunrise Movement is hers was very much against militarism. And you really can't have a World War Style II mobilization unless you fund it. And right now, all the money is going into these wars. And in fact, the Defense Department is the biggest user, is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter that there is, apparently. So I just wanted to go over some of her other bills that she's authored, just so the viewers know. She basically signed on to Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All Act, but then she also introduced a bill that would make insurance more affordable, that would limit the profits of insurance companies. And Bernie Sanders sponsored this bill along with Kamala Harris and Gillibrand and some others. But, you know, the people that I speak to about single payer basically say you can't work on both these bills. If you're trying to improve the ACA, it's attention that's not going towards getting rid of the insurance companies. All this does is provide, like the ACA did, more customers for the insurance companies to rip off, even if you do make it more affordable. I mean, the only way to achieve savings and to insure everybody and to provide people with comprehensive coverage is to get the insurance companies out of it. She also did a $500 billion housing bill, which would build affordable housing and rehabilitate affordable housing. And she would pay for this by raising the estate tax. Accountable Capitalism Act, which would have worker representatives on boards, and the stipulation that corporations would need to consider all stakeholders, not just stockholders. She has her 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, which would return the separation between commercial and investment banking. So investment bankers wouldn't be able to gamble with our money. And she has something that I don't have the details in front of me, but I will put a link in the comments, her Anti-Corruption and Public Integrity Act, which really has a lot of very specific things in there that would reduce special interest lobbying and special interest influence in our elections. So, I mean, these things are very wonkish. They're very thought out. And these are some of the good things that she's done. I mean, one thing that I found, a small thing, was that she broke up the hearing aid monopoly. Apparently, the hearing aid companies made it so you had to get a prescription for the hearing aids. And now you can get hearing aids, you know, over the counter. And that was a wonderful thing for people that need hearing aids. As everybody's saying, and as I just said a minute ago, you can't really work on all these big domestic programs unless you deal with the permanent war economy. And that is, I think, probably the biggest objection that I and many progressives have to Elizabeth Warren, is that she's never met a defense budget that she doesn't like. I mean, she voted for this defense budget. And, you know, I was on Lila Garrett's show today, Connect the Dots, and she said, if Bernie doesn't run, she's going to vote for Kristen Gillibrand. And I'm like, why would you vote for her? She's a Republican. She's such a fraud. And she said, because she was the only senator who did not vote for Trump's $700 billion plus defense budget. And I said, well, Bernie didn't vote for it. And she said, well, he's not a Democrat. Well, you know, technically, he's not a Democrat. She supported sanctions against Iran, which we know sanctions only end up hurting the people. She supported the drone wars in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, which Obama was fighting by. And the support was discerned by the fact that she said, we have to fight al-Qaeda in whatever way we can. She opposed, she's very bad on Israel. She opposed Palestine's membership in the UN. She said you can't dictate terms to Israel regarding building illegal settlements or cutting off water supplies to Palestinians. She also does not support the BDS movement, and she supports the two-state solution, which people who know what's going on over there know is all but dead. I mean, they can't have two states now because they've infiltrated that Palestinian territory so much, it's almost irreversible. So what are your thoughts on Elizabeth Warren and foreign policy?
She has moved on these issues a little bit. She did the speech, I think it was this year, where she talked about, and she's done an earlier speech, to be fair, as well, where she talked about how there's the blowback from sort of continually just trying to zap our way out of terrorism. You know, it's sort of the Western world's approach to terrorism is just to kind of blow as many people up and hopefully they'll do it. And, you know, she talks about how that just creates more terrorists because you end up killing civilians, and those civilians always have family members who get pretty angry at their family being murdered. So, you know, she's saying the right things. She was, you know, on Maddow last night, as you pointed out to me, talking about how the withdrawal from Syria, which may not be happening, or, you know, who knows what's happening with that, but the withdrawal from Syria and Afghanistan was the right thing, even if, you know, procedurally it you know, wasn't done exactly the way that it should be. I mean, well, neither, to be fair, was the entry into Syria.
Right. Yeah.
But procedurally.
Here's the thing with Maddow, and I was really impressed with this because I thought Maddow was going to plots, and that's a Yiddish word for shit or pants, you know. I could actually, you know, and she knows how Rachel Maddow thinks about these things. Rachel Maddow is one of the biggest war hawks out there, and she basically said unequivocally she supported Trump's withdrawal from Syria and Afghanistan, and the only thing she didn't like about it is that he did it by tweet. She did not say anything about doing it slower, about protecting the Kurds, about any of the stuff, you know, the cover stories that they're giving us right now. She was completely adamant that we need to be out of there. So I give her kudos on that one. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, you know, Sanders himself, you know, his foreign policy took some time to develop. He moved markedly left on for foreign policy during and after the 2016 election. And I mean, and Sanders and Warren do have basically similar stances, I think, on foreign policy, although I think Sanders is much more critical of Israel, far more. But I think it's also important to know that, you know, and we have to talk about Sanders because ultimately the discussion about Warren and these other candidates is a discussion also about Sanders because he is considered the sort of most progressive candidate in the race. But I mean, when you look at Sanders, in terms of foreign policy, I mean, he at the moment is really with some other politicians, sure, but he's at the forefront leading the charge in terms of Democrats' shift on foreign policy. He was the one who put forward the Yemen resolution. You know, he's been making a stink about that for years, ever since Trump was in power. You know, I mean, it was a little late for sure. Could have done it under Obama, but you know, he got there in the end. He did a speech last year that was, to my mind, probably the most radical speech on foreign policy by a politician that I've heard in my lifetime. You know, basically criticizing the entire sort of mindset that kind of is held by the Washington foreign policy blob, you know, for lack of a better word. Here, you know, so you've got the Yemen example, Israel as well. Of course, he's been pushed by activists on the ground, as all politicians are. But Sanders, to his credit, has also moved left. He could move more, of course, but baby steps. And it's not just foreign policy. I mean, you know, Warren didn't want to sign on to single. You know, she said during the campaign that she didn't think single payer was a good idea. No Democrat did. This was a policy that was really put on the popular stage, yes, by activists on the ground, but also by Sanders, by championing it during the primary. You know, he took a risk in doing that, and now the party has moved to him as Warren has. Warren now supports Medicare for All.
That's the final question that I want to ask you is, as people have adopted his party platform planks, or his platform planks, do you think it's going to be more difficult? You know, he's almost a victim of his own success, if you will. I mean, he's gotten these ideas accepted. As I started the show by saying, they're now going to be holding hearings on single payer. I mean, not that that can really go anywhere when you have the Senate, controlled by Republicans, but I think it's a very big step to at least be holding hearings on this. And I know that they had a meeting. It was announced in the paper that they had a meeting in Washington, D.C., and nobody reported on what was discussed. But it seems clear to me that unlike in 2012, 2016, Warren running is not going to be the factor that stops Bernie from running. Keeps saying that he needs it to be somebody who can beat Trump. And quite frankly, that's the politics of it, shifting over from the policy a little bit to the politics. I really think that Trump could make mincemeat of Pocahontas, as he calls her. Right. I mean, you look at that rollout of that video that she did in which she proved she had 1/700th whatever percent Native American ancestry, 6 generations back, and to release it, right before the midterms, which everybody thought was terrible timing. I guess she wanted it released before her announcement so it could be dealt with and put behind her. But I don't think this issue is going away, and I think it only serves to alienate a lot of Native American tribes who felt that, she was claiming them. Even though she used the right language, it still kind of came off like that, Spoken to a lot of Trump supporters over my time. And like so many of them, this is just anecdotal, of course, but so many of them said that they weren't Republicans. They really just liked Trump and the way he was going to shake things up. And if Bernie had gotten the nomination, they would have voted for him. But I guarantee you, I didn't ask the question, but I can almost guarantee you that probably none of them would have said they would vote for Warren. So do you think that she has a chance to beat Trump? Do you think there's anybody else that is both progressive as Bernie and has a chance to beat Trump that should be entering this race?
I mean, I think she definitely has a chance to beat him. Trump is wildly unpopular, even among people who voted for him. A lot of people have, Trump voters aren't all complete idiots or anything like that. That's sort of the unfair characterization that sort of the media or certain figures in the media like to paint it as. But there's a lot of Trump voters who voted for him because even if they didn't think that he was a upstanding guy, they really did think that he was going to aggressively champion the interests of American workers. And then, they found that no, he didn't. That not only has he failed to sort of stop the shuttering of various plants around the country, but he's also in the exporting of jobs, but he's also actively worked against their interests because he's gone, lockstep with the Republican agenda, which is just to funnel as much money as possible to the super rich. So I think she could beat him for sure. I think also, the thing with the 23andMe, the genetic testing, it does show that she, I guess, can easily let herself be maybe get him under her skin, which is a worry. I think also we're going to hear a lot of talk about in the next year and a half that Warren, it'll be put into sort of gendered terms and sexist terms, and that Warren can't win because she's a woman. I don't believe Hillary Clinton lost because she was a woman. I believe if Elizabeth Warren loses, if she is the presidential candidate, it won't be because she's a woman. It'll be.
Also, yes, let me just interrupt. They've also brought up that unlikable thing that they brought up about Hillary, which is very sexist. And I agree with Elise Hogue, who tweeted that the other day. And, she's now being compelled to show that warm side of her. And, there's no man that is ever compelled to show that warm side, and you would never say that Bernie Sanders is warm.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would urge people to ignore that stuff. There's going to be a lot of that. There always is. I think there are very important fundamental differences between Warren and Bernie Sanders' record and approach to politics that I think need to be examined, and I've outlined them here today. I think people should do as much as they can to ignore the inevitable idiotic sexist takes that will be out there. I think she absolutely can beat him. I think part of it is also going to be, though, how wedded she is to a Democratic Party that people, at least working people, don't really like and don't have much passion for. The Democrats won their big midterm election largely on the back of sort of suburban voters, voters who probably voted for Trump in the previous election. So, I mean, she can win. I think Sanders has a better chance of actually not just beating Trump, but reorienting the Democratic Party and, in fact, bringing out voters who have been disillusioned with the party for a long time, and not just the sort of the white working class that people love to talk about, but there are many voters of color who are deeply unexcited about the Democratic Party in its current modern iteration, and those voters need to be brought back into the fold. Otherwise, all you're doing is competing for sort of some reactionary voters that sort of dislike Trump because he happens to tweet a lot and is rude.
Well,
so
we're going to have to leave it there because we've gone way over time, and I really want to thank you for staying on this long, talking about all these important subjects. I do think that is really the challenge. Bernie is trying to transform the Democratic Party. The question remains, will he be able to, unless we get rid of the outsized influence of big money in politics? I'm dubious, but I support, coming from Occupy, what we call the diversity of tactics. So I support my friends trying to take over the Democratic Party, as well as my friends trying to build up the Green Party, or Nick Brana with the People's Party. And mostly I support people that are working on the outside on issue campaigns, trying to move the politicians, because as Bernie always says, it's the people and social movements that make change, not the politicians. So thank you for being on my show. I'm going to say goodbye to you now so that I can promote my upcoming shows for the next couple of weeks. But I hope you come back on. I'm going to be watching your articles. And if you do any more of these presidential candidates, I'd love to have you come on.
For sure. I'll let you know.
All right. Thanks, Branko.
Okay. Thanks for having me. See ya.
If you have a topic you would like me to address, if you have somebody you think I should be interviewing, please feel free to put it in the comments. And as always, if you're not already following me on Twitter, my handle is Lauren_Steiner. Again, Happy New Year, folks. And let's make sure 2019 is a year that we keep fighting.